Hi there, class. It's Faisal coming at you with your class of the day for June 9th, ENG4U. We're getting started with Othello in earnest today, right? Yesterday I gave all the background, but today we're really going to get down to business here. So, first of all, Othello is a play, right? And when it comes to Shakespeare, here's what I always tell my students, right? The guy did not care about the actual text of his plays, right? What he cared about was the performances. So in the guy's lifetime, Shakespeare never actually published his plays, right? He didn't, put his plays on sale and say, hey, do you want to buy my play Othello or do you want to buy my play Macbeth, right? He just did the performances, right? And the performances would go on for a couple of months, right? People would go watch the plays, right? And they would make a lot of money. And then he'd move on to the next play. In his lifetime, he never actually published a play for you to read, right? Because for him, it was just, it's on stage and that's it. So, what that tells you is that he was writing so that his plays could be watched, not just read, right? So, we're reading the play here, but I think the biggest favor you can do for yourself is find a way to watch the play. Now, I can't give you just a free video of the version I normally would play in class because that would be piracy and I would maybe get in trouble and I don't want to do that as a teacher. So I can't just give you something, right? But I can tell you where you can find these things. So, first of all, on Amazon Prime, I just saw this now. There's a version on Prime Video. So, if you have Amazon Prime, you already have Prime Video, by the way. So, there's a version of Othello there, right? Which, honestly, I just heard about it 10 minutes ago. It's Othello, except it's set in London and Othello is in the police, right? So, that sounds pretty interesting to me. Maybe after I have marked all of your essays, I'll watch it, but that sounds pretty cool, right? So, give that a shot if you want. And there's also, if you go to YouTube, you type in Othello full play, just like I have up here, right? Then you can find all sorts of versions that are usually just recordings of the play, right? So you can find, the Seaview Playwrights Theater Company and the Raham channel, all of this. So there are all sorts of versions that you can find on YouTube, and those ones are free. They might not be very good, though, right? So, hopefully you can find a good version. In my opinion, the best version of Othello is, what's wrong with this? Is this one. Hang on, let me show you. I'll just get it on IMDb here. Othello, Kenneth Branagh. This one with Kenneth Branagh and Lawrence Fishburne, right, is, in my opinion, the best one, right? And you can get it on, like, Amazon and everything like that. But it's not available in Canada. That's a sort of annoying thing. So you can get it, but you might have to pay money for it. There might be other ways for you to acquire it that I am not able to talk about here as a TDSB teacher, but of the ones I've seen, this one looks like the best. Although who knows, the one on Prime Video with Eamon Walker, Christopher Eccleston, and Keely Hawes. Oh, Keely Hawes, she's good. That sounds interesting to me, right? So I'm gonna watch it. But if you want what, in my opinion, is the best one, go for the one with Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh, right? So that would be my recommendation for Othello. Regardless, watch the play, right? I cannot emphasize this enough. If you're just reading the text, you will have a hard time with this. But if you actually see it performed, right, then it'll be a lot better. It'll be a lot easier. Shakespeare did not want to be read, right? His expectation was that the people would come in and see his plays, hear his plays, right, and experience that way, right? He did not intend for anyone to sit down and read the plays, right? He never even thought to publish them in his lifetime. It was only after the guy died that the actors got together and were like, "Oh, like let's put together all of the stuff he wrote, right, and make sure it's preserved." So that's number one. Now, let's get to the play then. Act 1. So, our play here begins with two men, Rodrigo and Iago, right? And this is just on the first page, or Act 1, Scene 1, right? We have these two men coming in and talking to one another. So, hold on a second. Okay, so you play Iago, or you play Rodrigo. I'll play Iago. Yeah, okay. So the scene that begins with Rodrigo and Iago entering. So let's see. Tush, never tell me. I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine, shouldst know of this. Sblood, but you will not hear me. If ever I did dream of such a matter, abhor me. Thou toldst me thou didst hold him in thy hate. Despise me if I do not. Three great ones of the city, in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off cap to him. And by the faith of man, I know my price. I am worth no worse a place, but he, as loving his own pride and purposes, invades them with a bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war, and in conclusion, none suits my mediators. For, certes, says he, I have already chose my officer. And what was he? Forsooth, a great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, a fellow almost damned and a fair wife, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of a battle knows, more than a spinster, unless the bookish lyric, wherein the togged castle can propose as masterly as he, mere prattle without practice is all his soldiership. But he, sir, had the election, and I, whom his eyes had seen the proof, at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen, must be belied and calmed by debtor and creditor, this countercaster. He in good time must his lieutenant be, and I, God bless his mark, his moorships ancient. So, Shakespearean speeches. I know a lot of you have experience with Macbeth, and it comes in handy here. Because in order to successfully read a Shakespearean speech, you need to sort of train yourself how. It's not that hard once you get used to it, right? You just sort of have to look for three key things. The first thing is the reason I'm giving you this PDF version, which is the glossary, right? So the glossary is very handy because it'll tell you the meaning of words that you might not know right away. So, for instance, in this speech, three great ones of the city in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off-capped to him. And you might be thinking, off-capped? What does that mean, off-capped? Well, it says the number 3 there, footnote. So what you do is you go to the right side, and you find number 3, off-capped. Took off their caps in a gesture of pleading, right? So the glossary is your first friend when it comes to understanding a Shakespearean speech. Use it, right? It is, again, there to help you, right? So please don't give up so quick. The second thing you need to do is sort of look for the main idea of a speech, right? So that usually comes at the beginning and the end of a Shakespearean speech, right? So Iago here says that three great ones of the city, in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off-capped to him. And we know off-capped means took off their caps in a gesture of pleading, right? So we know that three people went to Othello and asked them to make Iago the lieutenant, right? A lieutenant, by the way, in this context, is sort of a second in command, right? It's someone who's, sort of vice general or something like that, right? Sort of his, second in command. So he wanted to be the lieutenant, and 3 people went and pleaded for him, but, well, but he, as loving his own pride and purposes, evades them with a bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war and inclusion, non-suits my mediators, right? So again, use the glossary, right? This word non-suits, we look up there. 6, refuses. That is, turn down their suit. So in other words, he wanted the job as lieutenant, and Othello said no, right? And in his place, he gave it to this guy called Michael Cassio. So, that's the main thing, is to find the main idea of a speech, and he has the main idea of the speech is that he has not gotten his job. So, Iago is upset about this, and that brings us to number 3 for understanding Shakespearean speeches. You want to make sure you don't get lost in the similes and in the references that that are always placed in these longer speeches, right? So the person who got the job was a guy called Michael Cassio, who we'll meet later, right? So he's a Florentine, a fellow almost damned and a fair wife, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the vision of a battle, no, more than a spinster, unless the bookish lyric when the togged counsels can propose as masterly as he, mere prattle without practice, right? So again, use the glossary if you don't follow the words, right? A spinster is a woman who's not been married yet, right? Basically, what he's saying about Cassio there is that this guy doesn't know anything about fighting. He's just like a bookkeeper or that sort of thing. So that is what Iago is upset about. So that's the essence of looking at these Shakespearean speeches. Use the glossary, look at the beginning and end of a speech for the main points, and focus on things that are being talked about already, right? So there are always comparison and similes in longer Shakespearean speeches. Don't get lost in them. Now then, Iago here hates Othello because he did not get a job from him. More on that later. But Rodrigo, meanwhile, hates Othello because he is marrying Desdemona, and Rodrigo would much rather Desdemona married him instead of Othello, right? So Othello is marrying Desdemona, and Rodrigo does not like that. Now, here's where we get to the heart of the matter. So what's happened is Othello and Desdemona have what's called eloped. Let me put that in here. So they've eloped. What that means, what that word means is eloping is when you get married in a church without the parents' permission, right? So it's a legal marriage, right? And once a priest marries you, you're married. But eloping is done against the will of the parents, right? It's sort of when you run off and get married without the consent of anyone. So, this is where things get interesting. So Othello is a black soldier, right? As we've been talking about from last time, right? Othello is black, and he's there working as a mercenary, whereas Desdemona is a white noblewoman, I should say. So this is an interracial marriage. So this play is set in Venice, which is a white city, and it's being written by Shakespeare, who is living in London, which at the time was also a white city. There's no such thing as multiculturalism in the 16th century London, right? That's unheard of. And so interracial marriage is something extremely rare in Shakespeare's time, right? There are Africans in London, of course, but they're mostly travelers and sailors. There are, some mixed couples, especially along the southern part of Europe, right, which is closest to Africa, and the northern part of Africa for that matter, right? So it's not like it doesn't happen ever, right? But it's not a multicultural subtext, right? This is not Toronto that we're talking about here. Even Toronto, by the way, you might be surprised. In 2011 in Canada, 4.6% of marriages in Canada are interracial, right? Most people think it's a lot higher than that. But even in Canada, which does pride itself in multiculturalism, it's only 4.6%. So it's not relatively common. Nevertheless, right, this is very controversial, right? And Rodrigo, who was in love with Desdemona, is especially upset about it. Now, the interesting thing about Othello is that he's living in Venice, and as we're going to discover, he's there to help defend the city. He's good at doing that, and they absolutely love him for that, right? So when he is defending the city and when he is, working as a mercenary professionally, right? They absolutely love this guy, right? You're going to see that in scene 2, and you're going to see that throughout the entire play, that everyone respects and loves this guy as a general. But when it comes to other things, particularly marriage, right, and marrying a nobleman's daughter, that's something different. That is putting down roots, and we'll see that causes Rodrigo and Iago to have, well, their grievances. So, their first move, right, or Iago's first move, is to tell Desdemona's father that his daughter has now gotten married without his permission, eloped, right? So, this is on page 9 of the PDF, right? Act 1, Scene 1, line 108, right? So, they're talking to Brabantio, right, who's the name of Desdemona's father, right, and they're telling him, hey, your daughter eloped, right, and Iago says, Zounds, sir, you are one of those that will not serve God if the devil bid you, because we are come to do you service, and you think we are ruffians. You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, you'll have your nephews neigh to you, you'll have coursers for cousins, and gennets for Germans, right? So, what he is doing there is he's talking about Othello, right? Who, again, we haven't met Othello yet, but Iago is talking about Othello and this whole thing of calling him a horse, right? You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, right? That is racial language, right? And it is there quite deliberately, right? He is referring to Othello as a horse, right? And, a stud horse particularly, and he's dehumanizing him already. So what I'm saying here is that Iago is essentially saying, hey, your daughter's getting married to a black man, and you should be mad about that. And Rodrigo, Brabantio, is instantly angry because of that, right? Even though Othello is very loved in the city and everything like that, right? He is still quite outraged that his daughter would marry, not just without his permission, but specifically marry a black man, right? So we can see that racism is definitely going to be one of the main themes of this play, right? We can see that right away. Now, I will emphasize one thing before you jump to a conclusion about Shakespeare. Iago is the bad guy, right? You should know that. Iago is very much the antagonist of the story. So his being racist is maybe, don't think, oh, Iago's racist, therefore Shakespeare's racist, right? You can, by the way, argue later on that Shakespeare is racist if you so desire, right? Certainly you would not be the first people to do that. But it is nevertheless something to take into consideration when you see what Iago is doing, right? Iago's the bad guy, as we'll talk about in a moment. But nevertheless, we see that those kinds of slurs are sort of peppered into Iago's speeches, right? Oh, here it is, on line 88, right, on page 9, Iago says, your heart is burst, you have lost half your soul. Even now, very now, an old black ram is topping your white ewe, right? An ewe being a kind of horse, right? So I don't know about horses, but nevertheless, the keywords there are black and white, right? So for the beginning of the play, we very much see, it's a racial thing, right? It's not just, hey, your daughter got married without your permission. It's your daughter married a black guy, right? And that's what is the big problem here. So, before we go on, quick point about Iago here. This line on page 5, or page 7, sorry, line 42, is sort of the key to Iago in the entire play. So Iago, as we said, is mad about not getting the job. There's also other things he's mad about Othello for, right? But this is the key to Iago right here, where he says to Rodrigo, "O sir, content you. I follow him to serve my turn upon him." So, what that means is that he is working for Othello in order to get his revenge for not getting the job. And again, other things that we'll talk about later, right? It's not just not having a job that makes Iago so angry, right? It's other things as well. But nevertheless, he's working for Othello in order to get his revenge for not getting the job, right? So what that means is that Iago is pretending to be Othello's friend, right? While at the same time looking for his revenge, right? So he is, going to sort of pretend to be Othello's friend and at the same time, look for revenge, right? So, should I talk about devils now? No, I'll talk about devils later. So, nevertheless, that's the kind of person he is, right? And we see that start to take place in the scene immediately after, right? Because, he's the one who calls Desdemona's father, right? And gets Othello in trouble, right? So he's the one who does all that. But then we'll see in Act 1, Scene 2. So, Iago in Act 1, Scene 2, right at the beginning, right? Right after he's gotten Brabantio all mad, and Brabantio is going to try to arrest Othello, Iago shows up with Othello, and by the way, here we finally meet Othello, and we see he says, "Though in the trade of war I have slain men, yet do I hold it very stiff of the conscience to do no contrived murder. I lack iniquity. Sometimes to do me service 9 or 10 times I had thought to have yerked him here under the ribs. 'Tis better as is. Nay, but he prated and spoke such scurvy and provoking terms against your honour, that with the little godliness I have, I did full hard forbear him. But I pray you, sir, are you fast married? Be assured of this, that the Magnifico is much beloved, and hath in effect a potential as double the Duke's. He will divorce you, or put you what restraint and grievance the law, with all his might to enforce it on, will give him cable." So, remember, Iago caused the problem, right? He's the one who got Brabantio angry about this marriage, right? He's the one who's reported it. But now he's going to Othello and he's warning him, right? So he's caused a problem for Othello by, informing his wife's father that they've eloped and everything like that. So he caused the problem, and now he's going to Othello and warning him that, hey, that guy, the father of your wife is coming, your father-in-law is coming to arrest you, right? So he is, pretending to be Othello's friend, even as he's working behind the scenes to sabotage him. So that brings us to one of our key concepts in this play, right? That I'm going to be mentioning again and again, and that you have to take into consideration when you're studying Othello, and that is the idea of dramatic irony. So, dramatic irony is very simple. It's when we, and when I say we, I mean the audience, know something that the characters on stage do not know. So, what that means is we saw Iago with Rodrigo cause trouble and get Othello, or cause trouble and report Othello's marriage to Desdemona to Rodrigo, right? So we saw that, right? We saw that with our very eyes, we heard it with our ears, everything like that. Othello did not see it, right? So Othello has no idea that Iago was doing that. In fact, how could he have an idea? He was not there, right? It was just Iago, Rodrigo, and Brabantio. So Othello has no idea of what's happened. And here's the key thing. We have to take that into consideration for this entire play, because this play is all about dramatic irony. We will always know what Iago is doing, but Othello will, well, he has to figure it out. So, from Othello's perspective, and this is something that's very important, from Othello's perspective, Iago has come to warn him about a big problem, right? So he's gotten a nice warning from Iago here. So therefore, Iago is his friend, right? So, if someone warns you that something bad is going to happen, of course you're going to think, oh yeah, that guy, is a good guy. He's my friend. So that is the issue here, right? Is that from Othello's perspective, Iago has come to warn him. So let me give a big warning right now for the purposes of questions and for the purposes of everything we're going to do in the course. When it comes to Othello, right? I'm talking about Othello the character, not Othello the play, right? If you're ever going to say Othello is stupid, right, you always have to take into consideration dramatic irony, right? So if you ever say, for instance, oh, look, Othello, he's trusting Iago here, right? He thinks Iago is a good guy, even though Iago caused the problem. You have to think, dramatic irony. Okay, so that is what's going on here in the first two acts. So what we're going to see is Iago, or well, Brabantio come and arrest Othello and everything like that. So, for tomorrow, right, because I know this video was probably already too long, I want you guys to read the rest of Act 1, right? So, this is going to be for tomorrow. Read the rest of Act 1, right? So, we're going to get well into this thing. And well, should I give you guys the question now? No, yeah, I'll hint at the question now. You guys are gonna answer it tomorrow after my video, right? It's gonna be, we're gonna be talking about is Othello the how do I put this? The let me think for a second. So the question will be, Iago describes Othello as a horse and a ram. Is that an accurate description of the man? What I mean by that is, obviously he's not a horse, but is he animalistic? Is he a beast? Is he brutal? Right? What kind of person is Othello? So I'll be talking about that tomorrow in the video, right? I want to discuss that a bit more and look at some of his speeches, right? But that will be the subject we tackle then, and I will put up a Google question about this. Not exactly this question, but very similar tomorrow. So for now, read the rest of Act 1, which goes up to page... Where is it? Act 1, Scene 3. Yes, it goes up to page 43, which isn't as much as it might sound like, by the way, because, it's this PDF and it's only half the pages that are being used. So you should be able to do that. So read up to page 43 in the PDF tomorrow, right? And I will be back to explain as much as I can. And again, if it's at all possible for you, watch the play, right? It will help you immensely. So if you're thinking I can't tell what's going on with this guy or anything like that, watch it, right? So if you can, do it. Anyway, guys, this video has gone on a while, so I will leave it there and I will see you guys tomorrow. So until then, take care.